That intro is Matt LaFleur talking about his schedule for the week. I thought that was interesting. Again, not every intro to the show has to be funny or clever. Sometimes we can just learn something. We can learn a bit about the Packers' schedule. We can learn how joint practices go. Not every intro has to be a banger. Sometimes they could just be informational. I don't really know how their Friday game in Brazil affects that schedule, right? That question was from Saturday after the Ravens game. And the reporter was asking, so now what's your schedule for the next couple of days? Because you got to get down to 53 guys on the roster by Tuesday, right? That's what Zach just said. And Matt LaFleur said, well, it's a little funny with us playing on a Friday next week instead of a Sunday. And then he described the next couple of days. It's like, well, wouldn't that be your schedule even if you played on a Sunday? Even if you played next Thursday? Isn't that would be your schedule anyways? So this is when I always say that football coaches they're just one of a kind. Like only a football coach would be like, well, in 2 weeks, we got to do this thing about 48 hours early. But our schedule, here it is, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday. So, well, the schedule's the same. So when I always bring up, football coaches, they're weird and they stress over things. There's another example. It's like, hey, Matt LaFleur, what's your schedule for cutdowns? What's your schedule for having guys in the building the next couple of days? He's like, well, we got to play on Friday in Brazil. So guys will be back on Wednesday. Cut downs 53 on Tuesday. We'll be back on Wednesday, just like every other team. But remember, next week we have a game on Friday. It's like, man, no wonder some coaches like Matt LaFleur historically struggled with travel. Like, why are you? Well, our schedule's a little unique, but it's not though. You cut down on Tuesday to 53, and then you'll have guys back in the building meeting up for practice and game preparation on Wednesday. You'll play 2 games earlier. That doesn't change your schedule. I'm not even really ripping Matt LaFleur. Again, I'm just having fun with a football coach, overthinking something that only a football coach would overthink. At least that's the way I'm reading it. I could be wrong. I think I'm reading that information correctly. This is the Wisco Sports Show. My name is Grant Bills. I hope you had a great weekend. I had a nice dinner on Saturday night. Yesterday, I helped a friend move. I tweaked the oblique on the backside of my back. It's fine today, a little sore, but when it happened, we were turning a desk. I'm like, ugh. And I first thought of Ryan Braun. It's like, all right, 10-day injured list stint. I understand an oblique strain. That's nothing to mess around with. The desk was heavy, by the way. We got it. It was one of those desks where you push a button, it goes up and down because my buddy works from home. And he didn't before he unplugged it and got it ready, he didn't bring it down. So he didn't unwrap any of the cords or anything. He just taped him to the desk, which is fine until we got to rotate the thing and the monitor arms are swinging and whatever. But that was my weekend. Watched the Brewers both Friday and Saturday night. And then yesterday kind of cooled down the weekend with the Brewers on the TV. Watched a little preseason last night. Drake May getting ready for today. I did Bill's show earlier, so I had to do a little extra prep yesterday, just a couple extra hours. Wanted to make sure I had my ducks in a row. You're going to hear some of those ducks coming up throughout the show. I talked with Ryan Wood at 11:30 this morning on Bill's show, mostly just about Anders Carlson. It wasn't my intention to just do 15 minutes on Anders Carlson with Ryan. It's kind of where he wanted to hang out, it seemed. Like he had a lot to say about the kicker battle. I really don't, but he did. So that's kind of where we hung out. That's what we discussed. So you'll hear that in a little bit. Kurt Hogg of the Journal-Sentinel was down in Nashville last week watching and talking with people around the Nashville Sounds. He will join us to talk Brewers, the weekend series against Oakland, and to kind of just think about and preview the next month as the Brewers assumedly have the division locked up. But now we look at seeding and we look at potential playoff questions. That's a little bit down the line, but just kind of future forward-looking topics. That's what I discussed with Kurt. You're going to see our conversation with Kurt. He was nice enough to hop on the live stream. You'll see that if you're watching the live stream either on Twitter, YouTube, or Facebook. Phoner with Ryan Wood, just old school Packers-based radio, baby. So we'll get to that in about 25 minutes at 4:30. 608-321-1670. If you would like to join the show, I'd love to have you coming up after our first break, and you can tweet me as well at Wisco Grant. So many different things to discuss tonight between the Packers and the Brewers, with the Packers playing their final preseason game. Cutdowns to 53 looming tomorrow. The Brewers, really nice comeback win, bounce back. And I say comeback after dropping 2 of 3 to the Cardinals, losing games 2 and 3 of that series and blowing a save. And it was just a frustrating way for that series to wrap up. So I thought they came back, bounced back nicely in Oakland, and they continue to run away with the Central. I have a Packers thought and a Brewers thought, and then we'll take our first break. Packers thought first. I hinted at this last week on Thursday night or on Friday night. We're always pulling our hair out over wide receiver 6, wide receiver 7. Which one should they keep? We're always losing our mind over the third quarterback versus the second quarterback should they keep? Well, if we keep this one and we subject the other one to waivers, they're going to get claimed and they won't make it through to the practice squad, right? We always lose our mind over this. I'm telling you, don't. Please. And I'm directing this at the Peter Bukowski school of thinking. And I love Pete, so I can give him flack. I texted him this already. I'm like, hey, let's calm down with Malik Heath is wide receiver 4 on some NFL teams. It's like, well, maybe on like the Patriots, maybe, but do the Patriots want him, right? Like all of these players exist to make a Kamala Harris. They exist in the what is it? They exist in the context from which they came, right? Malik Heath is a great fit for the Packers. Blocker, big physical wide receiver. Like, yeah, he's a nice bottom of the roster wide receiver by the team that spotted him, identified him, brought him along, right? Repped him, all that stuff. Probably doesn't translate, just like a player on the Bengals or a player on the Texans doesn't translate to the Lions or to the Packers. We always lose our mind. Well, we got to keep this guy in the roster because if we don't, there's no way he'll get to the practice squad. Probably will though. Probably would be fine getting to the practice squad. Like, well, we can't cut this guy. He'll never clear waivers. I bet he would. Probably would. I have some data for you. This is what I was lacking last Thursday and Friday when I brought it up. This is from Arif Hassan, who's been on the show a couple times. It used to be at The Athletic. Now he has a Substack. It's called Wide Left, wideleft.football, I believe, if you want to look it up, or just look up Twitter at Arif Hassan, NFL. He sent this to me yesterday. We were going back and forth about this. 80 players were claimed off of waivers from 2021 to 2023. That's out of 3,552 cuts and 2,578 waivers. 2.3% of players were cut, and 3.1% of those waivers were claimed. And the final data shakes out to 0.8333 players per team over the last 3 years, which is minuscule, right? Single-digit percentage points. 2-3% of guys who are actually cut or subjected to waivers are actually scooped up by other teams. Now, you might know this. You might. But when I listen to sports radio or when I listen to certain podcasts or when I read blogs, we're always talking about like the final 5 guys on every roster are being monitored and coveted by every other GM around the league. No, it's not how it works. And the data doesn't support that, right? It's discussed like it's the college football transfer portal, that as soon as roster cutdowns, there's mass chaos and mobility from team to team and roster to roster. And this GM's like, oh, that guy's free from the Bengals. Grab him. This guy in the Patriots, I've been watching him. Grab him. No, maybe your team will grab one guy or have one guy grabbed from them. Maybe. Probably not. Because most teams, again, in the data, so I just gave you the numbers, most teams have picked up less than one player or claimed less than one player, either who was cut outright or placed on waivers over the last 3 years. Not over the last 1 year. The last 3 years, on average, each team has either claimed or signed outright a player that was cut loose on cutdown day. That's minuscule. So again, I like trying to predict roster cutdowns as much as the next guy. That's a lie. I don't really like it. I don't enjoy it. But I understand the utility and I understand why some people are into it. They'll get to the practice squad, okay? Like Sean Clifford's probably getting to the practice squad if the Packers cut him. Mostly because I don't think he's very good. And I think the Packers reached for him in the draft. But also because the data over the last 3 years, like that pretty much speaks for itself. A mention on Anders Carlson before we kick to the Brewers, before we switch to the Brewers. I don't want to talk about the 80% kick rate. That was going around a lot last week, where it's like, well, actually, in camp, he's made 80% of his kicks. And that's actually what Mason Crosby made for his entire career. That's actually not as bad as you think. Well, actually, there's a lot of actually about Anders Carlson. And look, have I been, if you've listened to the show, you know me, have I been someone to constantly piss and moan and complain about Anders Carlson? No. I've, for the most part, took his development or his insertion into the Packers kicker role in stride, saying, they're rebuilding. Last year was a reset year. You got to move off from Mason Crosby at some point. I thought last year made a lot of sense. I didn't like the misses. I didn't defend the misses, but I understood the exercise and I understood the path the Packers were taking, okay? This year is a little different because there are expectations. The Packers are stepping into what I believe to be a Super Bowl window. Really like this team and roster and coaching staff. I like it all. And I don't think they can afford to blow points all year long on a kicker who can't be trusted. 80%, 90%, throw whatever number at me you want. He can't be trusted to hit a 30-yarder. And I'm not trying to overreact to that last kick on Saturday night because I know it's just the preseason. But God, wasn't that a stark reminder that even when you think he's coming along and even that you think that Anders Carlson is developing, if a head coach can't trust his kicker to make a 30-yarder in perfect conditions, then that kicker isn't worth having. And I know that really throws a wrench into the Packers' wheel with just weeks to go before Brazil. And I know, but he can't hit a 30-yarder. If Matt LaFleur can't trust him to hit a 30-yarder, then he's not good for anything. I know he's talented, he's a big leg, and he actually is okay from 50 yards and out. But if Matt LaFleur, in a close game, can't afford him to go out there and kick from 30, 35, 40, 42 yards, he's useless, okay? That's the only thing I care about. So there's a lot of kicker discourse happening. Certainly will be a lot of kicker discourse after roster cuts and into the next week and a half. He can't hit a 31-yarder. I'm out, I think, on that. Out. Unless Rich Bisaccia has a really sturdy, strong, ironclad plan for how this kid is progressing and how he's being brought along and how he's improving. Out. 32 yards. That's the most damn, and it couldn't have happened at a better time or a worse time, depending on how you view it. The end of the last preseason game, just when you might be feeling okay. Maybe Carlson's taken the step in year two, and he missed something that's shorter than an extra point. All right, cool. A couple Brewers thoughts quickly before we take our first break, and I want to get to your calls. Leave a little time after this break before we get to Ryan Wood at the bottom of the hour, PackersNews.com. Bill was saying on Friday going into the weekend, you got to beat Oakland. Oakland's terrible. You got to take care of a terrible team. I'm not going to tell you that the Athletics are good. They're not. They're 20 games under 500, okay? But they're better than they were last year, and they're better than, I think, public perception. In the second half, or at least since July 1st, they're over 500. They went 15-9 in July. Can you call that a hot streak? No, but they were playing exciting, energized ball. And in August, they're a 500 team. Again, they're not awesome. They're not a contender, but they're not garbage. They're not wet trash, okay? So I actually give the Brewers a good amount of credit this weekend for kind of clunking their way through the last two games, blowing a save against the Cardinals, being shut down, some really bad at-bats against Miles Michaelis. And then they got to travel to the West Coast, weird start time, an uncommon opponent. Stephen Watson mentioned in the postgame, they haven't won a series in Oakland since 1996. I understand with the old American League rules, the interleague rule, I understand that, like, the timing, they don't have many opportunities, but still, like, that's not a place the Brewers play often. It's not a place that they are probably comfortable going. And they showed up on Friday night and they cracked them. And then they came back on Saturday and they cracked them again. And yeah, they lost yesterday, but it was close. They could have had some better at bats. I thought Montas battled really well, and CB Buckner was Stevie Wonder behind the plate. And it was a one-run game. So I would like to have yesterday, but I'm going to give them a lot of credit for showing up Friday night and Saturday night the way they did in an awkward, different ballpark on the West Coast against an uncommon opponent, because that's an easy spot to get trapped. That's an easy spot to get tripped up. That would have been an easy spot, classic spot. Would have surprised no one if the Athletics kind of caught the Brewers sleeping, coming off of that Cardinals series, licking their wounds a little bit from Devin Williams' blown save and now his sore shoulder or injury. That was a little odd. It doesn't seem like it's going to be anything long-term, but it's ominous nonetheless. And the Brewers showed up with the best attitude and approach Friday and Saturday night. And I thought for the most part yesterday they were fine. CB Buckner was actively awful. One of the worst umped games I've watched all year. And not just like a call or two here and there that I've blown up to make myself feel better about my team losing, but an actual horrid performance. And they were right there. They lost by a run. Right? If one or two swings go a little bit differently, they win that game. So I'm not overly worried about it. I give them a lot of credit actually for winning 2 out of 3 because I think they could have gotten tripped up. Would have surprised no one. So I know everyone's like, oh, the Athletics are terrible. You should beat them. Well, yeah, they're not great. They should, but the Athletics are better than most people think. That's a trap that I've seen the Brewers fall into too many times. So I'm impressed, and I actually give them a lot of credit for winning 2 out of 3 this weekend. Time for your calls, your texts and thoughts when we come back, and then we'll get to Ryan Wood, PackersNews.com. It's the Wisco Sports Show. Your thoughts next.
This is the Wisco Sports Show with Grant Bills on the Wisconsin Sports Zone Radio Network.
The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 3 minutes. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 2 minutes. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 1 minute. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 30 seconds.
It's the Wisco Sports Show. My name is Grant Bills. Happy Monday evening. Hope you had an excellent weekend. A couple fun Brewer games, especially Friday and Saturday. I had fun yesterday afternoon. Game served the purpose that it needed to serve for me. I was having a lazy Sunday afternoon, getting some work done, getting ready for today, and I had an entertaining game on. I got to get mad at the officials, at CB Buckner, the umpire, which is fun every once in a while as a baseball fan. Just a horrid performance yesterday. Missed a lot of strikes, miscalled a lot of strikes that weren't strikes. Brewers had opportunities to win, and I'll play you a clip from Pat Murphy at some point in tonight's show where he talked about the difference between Friday and Saturday and yesterday's game. 2 wins where the offense was cooking, and then 1 loss where the offense wasn't. So we'll talk about that in a little bit. Kurt Hogg of the Journal Sentinel is going to join us in the second hour of the show. Ryan Wood from PackersNews.com going to join us in about 15 minutes here to talk about their final preseason game, the kicking battle, looming roster cutdowns. They got to get down to 53 tomorrow. And I started the show, and I'll just reiterate this because I said a couple things to begin the show between the Packers and the Brewers and Carlson and roster cuts. I checked Twitter during commercial breaks now. And by the way, I'm on Twitter at Wisco Grant. I checked Twitter, and it's a lot of the Lions have released this player and the Broncos have released this player. And wow, veteran so-and-so is now available to be signed. And we always talk about, think about, discuss these 24 to 48 hours like it's the transfer portal in college football or like it's free agency in Major League Baseball. A lot of guys spring free. Most of them don't land anywhere. Most. We always, and sports talk radio is guilty of a great many things. This is one where it's like, well, just remember that first roster cut, you go down to 90 and then you go down to 53, but then you don't only have to beat out those guys, but then you have to beat out all the other guys around football. It's like, yeah, but no. Like sometimes, very rarely, but for the most part, and it's not hard to understand why, someone like Brian Gutekunst drafted and acquired the players that he wanted. You know what I mean? Grant Dubose or Malik Heath or I would say Cooper Pratt, but it's Michael Pratt. Cooper Pratt is the Brewers, or Sean Clifford, right? Like Brian Gutekunst selected those guys to be on this roster, right? It's like when you've lived in a house for a long time, it's hard to get rid of things, right? When you've lived in the same apartment, and when you've had certain like, oh, I have memories attached to this, you have stock in that lamp or in that shelf or in that end table or in that potted plant, right? Someone else buys your house or moves into that space. They get rid of stuff. There's a new space to them. And I understand when you move, you take things with you, but you get what I'm saying, right? Like possessions that we've had for a long time, I struggle to get rid of those. I have memories tied up in that. I have investment in that. If someone new were to come in and start living in my apartment, they'd be like, I'm getting rid of that. That's gone. No problem. No problem. You wouldn't even think about it, right? The NFL is similar. Like Brian Gutekunst has a house. And Sean Clifford is this nice end table. I remember the day that I bought that. I thought it looked so good in Goodwill on the shelf that it was on. That's, by the way, I just shop a lot at Goodwill. That's not commentary on Sean Clifford. I'm not saying he's a Goodwill quarterback. Although, maybe if the shoe fits, right? Brian Gutekunst looks around the apartment, a set of cups in the cupboard, and he's like, "Ah, oh, man, I love those cups. I remember when I got those at such and such a store with that old girlfriend that I used to live with." Right? Brian Gutekunst could go put those cups out on the curb, and a bunch of people could drive by and be like, "Oh, those kind of look like nasty ass cups. Why would I want those?" Right? It's not that's the same thing. I'm talking about the same thing that's going on now. Brian Gutekunst is going to put his crap on the curb. But the thing is, 31 other general managers also are putting crap on their curb. Right? Everyone's getting rid of crap. And again, it's an analogy. I'm not calling these players crap. Right? But we always think, well, Brian Gutekunst is watching 4 guys on this team and 3 guys on this team and just waiting for them. Like in the situation room during a war, he's watching 30 monitors at once. Like, no, he's pretty content. Maybe there's a couple kickers that they're watching because the Packers situation there is a little unique. Of course, there are situations. Some players are picked up, but it's not nearly to the level where we talk about it and discuss it. Again, over the last 3 years, the average is about 0.8 players. Each team has either signed outright or claimed on waivers. It's less than 1 player per team over the span of the last 3 years. Thousands of players. Less than 1 on average per team. So no. If you're worried about this guy getting to the practice squad, he's probably going to make it. Oh, the Packers can't cut it. Probably can, though. He'll probably be okay. He'll probably make it. You know what I mean? 608-321-1670. Chuck in Onalaska comments on the Brewers. Says apparently CB Buckner is the new Angel Hernandez. Yeah, the umpire scorecard came out today. Yow! Dude, he, without fail, not Angel Hernandez, CB Buckner will add like an extra 5 inches at the 3 o'clock of the strike zone, the outside of the strike zone away from especially a left-handed hitter. It's just like, so we're just going to expand the zone, put a nice patch there. He squeezed Frankie Montas at the bottom of the strike zone twice in one at bat. And that was the walk that then came around to score that kind of started that inning. There was I think it was then in Montas's final inning. Who did he strike out? I don't remember. Where CB Buckner, the third strike in a full count with 2 outs in the inning, he gave him 4 inches beneath it, just rung that guy up. And I'm like, well, that's karma, right? With bad umpiring, a lot of times it does balance out. But gee, he was bad yesterday. Let's take a call and then we'll get to Ryan Wood, PackersNews.com. 608-321-1670. It's the Wisco Sports Show. Who's this?
Hey, Grant, how you doing?
Hey, Cone Roller. I'm doing great. How are you today?
Good. I don't know if you just saw this, but looks like the backup quarterback problem just got solved.
What happened? I haven't looked at Twitter in the last 5 minutes or so. What'd they do?
Packers are trading for Tennessee Titans quarterback Malik Willis.
Wow. That's That is of course that's what the Packers did. This is Deshaun Kaiser all over again, right? It's Deshaun Kaiser core, where it's like another team drafted this quarterback high. He's also not very good. We'll acquire. Is it not Deshaun Kaiser 2.0?
Yeah, I don't really get it. I don't know why. Like, what's the difference between Malik Willis and Sean Clifford? I get Willis was drafted with a little higher potential, but from what we've seen on the field, I don't see any difference between what we got and what Malik Willis is bringing to this room.
Interesting. This is juicy. I'm glad you broke this news to me, Cone, before we took this break. I don't know. There's a difference between a developmental quarterback and a backup quarterback. I think Malik Willis is a developmental quarterback, but he's been in the league now. Is this about to be his third year? So he's just got another year.
Yeah.
To me, he's just another version of the guys they have. He's just another year further along.
He's a Brett Hundley. He's a Deshaun Kaiser. And what we need is a Brian Hoyer, Gardner Minshew, Trevor Siemian, type backup.
I don't disagree. We're talking again about the idea of a backup versus a developmental quarterback. They like to have guys in the hopper that they're developing, but those aren't always the best guys that you want to stick in if your quarterback actually goes down, right? I don't know. I feel better with Malik Willis, but I don't know. It feels like they're just, man. But this is what the Packers have done forever, Cone, right? Like they're always drafting. They're always bringing them in. Interesting. That's juicy. I'm going to need to think more about that. You can tell that I don't really have my take ducks in a row yet. Anything else, Cone? I got to get to Ryan Wood here in a minute or two.
Ryan Wood, ask him how the Mets are doing. And also, they got to get a kicker in here. Greg Joseph sucks. Carlson mega sucks. What is the downside to bringing back Mason Crosby? I'm yet to hear a good one other than that he's old.
He's old. He's too old. That's I think he's washed.
Adam Vinatieri kicked till he was like 50 years old.
Well, yeah, and Tom Brady played until he was almost 50. That doesn't mean everybody. There's outliers. He can't kick anymore. He was with the Giants last year. He was a bum. He couldn't even stay on their roster.
He couldn't kick in New York, but we've seen him. He can kick in Green Bay.
That's not a icon. I appreciate that. I gotta let you go. That's not a bad take. He just needs the magical air of Green Bay coming in off the water. Man. Malik, that's the most Packers thing I've ever seen. Let's take a break. We'll talk with Ryan Wood, PackersNews.com, coming up next. It's the Wisco Sports Show.
This is the Wisco Sports Show with Grant Bills on the Wisconsin Sports Zone Radio Network.
The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 5 minutes. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 4 minutes. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 3 minutes. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 2 minutes. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 1 minute. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 30 seconds.
Wisco Sports Show, a little breaking Packers news. They've traded a 7th-round pick for Malik Willis, quarterback from the Titans. It feels a lot like Deshaun Watson a couple of years ago, where it's like, well, we kind of liked him when he was in the draft once upon a time, and now he's available for almost nothing. They got him for a 7th-round pick. So this was probably just a way to ensure that they were going to get him. Instead of waiting for him to hit waivers or trying to sign him, like, we'll just trade you the 7th. It's fine. It's a little bit of a tax. It's a certainty tax to make sure that he ends up with us. That's fine. It's just like, you know the meme where it's like men will do blah, blah, blah instead of going to therapy? The Packers will do so many things to simply avoid signing a reasonable, experienced backup quarterback. Like, it's funny, like, ooh, they added another quarterback to their room. I still feel pretty bad if Jordan Love gets hurt. This doesn't really change my outlook on things. I'm going to learn more about this. You're going to hear this conversation that I had with Ryan Wood from earlier today, the PackersNews.com, as a part of the Bill Michaels show earlier today. I was filling in. He was great. A lot of Anders Carlson conversation and backup quarterback conversation as well. So I can't ask Ryan about Malik Willis. We'll get right back to that after this conversation. Here's our back and forth from earlier today. Has this been a challenging training camp preseason? The two biggest storylines are backup quarterback and kicker. And I've found as a radio host, it's hard to spin those two positions into long, interesting conversations. Have you experienced the same thing the last couple of weeks?
On the outside, when you are entering final cuts, and you're absolutely right, the two biggest issues on the roster are QB2 and kicker. You tend to think that's a good roster, right?
Yep.
But here, I'll spin this to where that's actually pretty concerning. because this is the Green Bay Packers. And the Green Bay Packers over the past decade, how many times have we seen QB2 and kicker wreck seasons, right?
Yeah.
It almost happened in 2013 when Aaron Rodgers broke his collarbone. He comes back just in time to save that season and get to the playoffs, but it was close. Why? They didn't have a stable backup quarterback situation. 2017, same thing happened. Aaron Rodgers, broken collarbone. They have a 4-1 start. They look like a team to beat in the NFC, and they have Brett Hundley at backup quarterback. They tank. They absolutely fall apart. And this time, Aaron Rodgers can't come back in time to save the season. Last year, it's kicking situation. Enough said, right? You guys, you remember what happened there, but it's not the only time. 2021, the same thing happened. Mason Crosby had a terrible season. The special teams were a disaster. It reared its ugly head in the playoffs against the 49ers again. And these two positions, quarterback 2 and kicker, over the past decade have absolutely left their mark on this franchise. So, Grant, it's not a great thing that this is the two issues that they have going into final cut.
So with kicker, my thought on Anders Carlson at the beginning of the show is you just got to be able to hit a 31-yarder. Like if I'm a head coach, I need to be able to trust you to make a 31. You know what I mean? Like I don't know that we need to get any more convoluted with that. I actually want to circle back to kicker because I have one more question. But since you mentioned backup quarterback, this is a Packers thing. I thought of this question on my drive in this morning, Ryan. This might be one of the best ideas or things that I've come up with for the show today. The difference between a developmental quarterback and a backup quarterback. With the Packers, they're one and the same, and they have been, and you mentioned a couple of other instances where that's been true. Should they be the same? Should the Packers handle those two ideas, developmental and backup quarterback? Should those be two different things, and do the Packers handle that incorrectly?
The question is always, and I do want to get back to Anders Carlson.
I do too. Yep.
Situation, because my goodness. But the question is always, do you have a backup quarterback that in the worst case scenario, and let's say hypothetically, your starting quarterback, who's the guy that's expected to win games for you? You know, in the perfect world, Jordan Love starts all 17 regular season games. But in the NFL, you don't always get the perfect world. You have to be prepared for something less than that. And if that happens, if Jordan Love misses a month, 4 games, do you have a guy that can potentially get you 2-2, if not at least 1-3? Because the difference between certainly 2-2, but even the difference between 1-3 and 0-4 can be huge in keeping the season afloat during that month. It is a huge, just getting that win is a big deal. Do you have a guy that can go out there and get you a win or not? And if it's just a developmental guy, you're looking at a guy who somewhere down the road someday might be able to get you that win, but can't right now. And if you're a contending team like the Packers are, you have to have a guy at QB2 that can get you that win. You just have to, because that can save your season long enough for Jordan Love to come back, and then everything's good in the world. Just get into the playoffs, you get red hot in January, and you have a chance to end up where you thought you would. I'd like to see Sean Clifford and Michael Pratt right now. There's clearly something that the Packers like in both. There's a reason why the Packers want to keep them in their fold. But 2 things. One, neither has shown that they can go get you the win. I don't see how you can look at their body of work this entire offseason, especially training camp, preseason, and say, yep, that guy can go give me that win if I need to over the course of a month. And 2, I don't see how either guy has any chance of getting claimed if released in final cuts. They're both going to be available to stash on the practice squad as a developmental guy. So I think if you think outside the box, you're Brian Gutekunst. You're trying to save a roster spot. Keep one quarterback on the initial 53, Jordan Love, obviously, and try to get another roster guy somewhere else, because you're going to still have a chance to get Michael Pratt and Sean Clifford on the practice squad.
It's something that I've talked about a couple of times to start the show here. Packers fans, I think we talk ourselves into, well, if we release this guy, he's getting picked up. Or there's no way we can see him. The numbers are actually, like, they're minuscule. The amount of players that actually change hands and change teams, like most teams like their guys. So I feel pretty confident probably that the Packers could sneak one of those quarterbacks through to the practice squad, and they could do some machinations to figure out, other spots on the roster. Ryan Wood is here covering the Packers. PackersNews.com has a great story about left tackle Rasheed Walker. Maybe we can talk about that in a minute. Kicker, Anders Carlson. Help me understand something, Ryan. He was not the most consistent, accurate kicker in college, right? There were other kickers that were more trustworthy, more accurate. I am then left to assume, because I think the Packers are smart, that they saw something in him that they thought they could develop and coach up. Are we in the middle of that process right now? Am I reading the Anders Carlson pick correctly? Because if there wasn't some deeper idea of what they could coach him into, then that pick really didn't make much sense.
I think that's where I'm at, Grant. I got to be honest with you.
You just don't think it makes any sense?
I'm not seeing it.
Okay.
Goodness, I think of it this way. I think of it, and this is really how bad the situation is. Before, if Anders Carlson never lines up for a 32-yard field goal against the Ravens, if that never happened, I think of it as kind of that ESPN win probability statistic. You know the graph, right? Where okay, this team has like a 98% chance of winning. I think of it as a job probability statistic, a graph, right? Anders Carlson was sky high in job security probability before that kick. He made a 54-yarder. He'd kind of checked the boxes just enough that he needed to. And his competition, Greg Joseph, really he had a scorching first half of camp and then came back down to earth. Greg Joseph did not finish well. So going into that 32-yarder, he's at 98%. Like, he's got it all but wrapped up. And then I just see the wide right, the graph just plummets. It falls off a cliff. Like, how do you keep a guy who truncated your season last year? He was a big, not the only reason, but a big reason that your season fell short. And then you can't rely on him even now to nail a 32-yard. It's an extra point, Grant.
Yeah.
How do you have the confidence in that guy going out in the regular season? I don't know how you can do it.
Well, and what I said at the beginning of the year last year, and I think this is probably the thinking of the Packers too. It's like, well, we don't expect to contend. So this is the perfect year to reset from Crosby to work on our next guy. And if our next guy has some hiccups in year one, ever, because they're probably not going to matter. The thing is, though, with kickers, you can't have that defining moment of failure. If you have a so-so rookie season or a bad rookie season, that's one thing. But if you have that one moment that costs you a huge game or a playoff game, and it's all that anybody can think of when they look at you, that's kind of damning. I mean, that's what happened to Blair Walsh. We've seen that happen. That's what happened with Carlson, right, in Minnesota too. And then he goes on and he goes on to succeed. Man, I wonder, if we remove that San Francisco game from the equation, if the situation is different. I don't know what coaching the Packers expected to be able to do with Carlson. I'm just not seeing it. Have you guys had conversations in and around with Rich Bisaccia's people about what's going on and what kind of work they're doing with him?
Yeah, it's this pretty standard coaching answer of, you got to find consistency and coach them up and whatnot. I don't, if they do know what's going on, which I'm sure behind closed doors they do, they're not exactly getting state secrets here. I just, at this point, the Packers have done everything for Anders Carlson that they can. Like, at some point, dude, you just got to go out and hit a 32-yard field goal. And I think Anders Carlson knows that.
Yeah.
Anders Carlson, for the first, he declined to answer questions after the Ravens game, which is stunning. This is a guy who has never done that before. After San Francisco in January, he answered questions, right? So for the first time, he declined to answer questions. You have to wonder where the mental state is at this point, because you just have to be able to go out and hit a 32-yarder and make that automatic. It should be automatic in this league. At this level, anything under 40, for goodness sakes, you got to hit 99 out of 100. I mean, that's the standard in this league.
Matt LaFleur can't send him out there on a chip shot wondering. Like, you need to be able to count on that, right? Like, that has to be when Matt LaFleur's doing the math of how he's managing a game and how he's, going about drives and decisions. Like, that's got to be a free space. That's got to be the free space on the bingo card.
Think of it this way too. Let's extrapolate it out into the very near future here. Okay. Let's say, okay, he's a draft pick. They still believe in him. You're going to carry him on the initial 53. You believe in the potential somewhere there. You're going to, and let's say they carry him into week one, and let's say he has a kick that blows week one.
Yep.
Think about the psychology of that for this football team. The kicking situation was a disaster last year. It was as bad can be last year, all the way up to the playoffs. And then you do everything you can. You create this competition. You make Anders Carlson go out and prove it. And then he doesn't really earn it, right? His last impression's missing a 32-yard field goal wide right, but you keep on the week one roster anyway. And then they're right back to where they started. If a bad missed kick changes a game against the Eagles, that's such a psychological blow. I don't know how you risk that.
Well, and then if they replace him with another kicker, and maybe you can tell me maybe I'm wrong on this, the other kicker kind of enters the situation with weight already on their shoulders because they know the situation they're coming into, right? And I think that in fact probably affects the mentals of the kicker and everyone else around the kicker. It's a really tricky situation. I'm sure the Packers like to avoid. Hey, before I let you go, your Rasheed Walker story was awesome. The path that he's taken to be the Packers left tackle. I want to know, I want people to go read it, so don't give us the goods, but tell us a little bit about that story. And also, like, one of my concerns with the Packers, it's a champagne problem. I think their 5 offensive linemen are all good. I don't know that they have do they have a cornerstone great player on this line? Could Rasheed Walker be that guy? Could he surprise people and kind of come out of nowhere after his first year to really be I don't want to say a star, but a cornerstone, really a point of confidence on the line?
I think Elton Jenkins might be a cornerstone guy. The problem is that guards, interior linemen are not tackles. We know that Elton Jenkins can be a really good tackle. He play everywhere, but you want that left tackle to be your cornerstone guy. That's why the Packers offensive lines with David Bakhtiari, when he was healthy, were so elite, because they had that elite franchise blindside blocker. That's the number one spot of the 5 by far. And that's a lot of weight on Rasheed Walker's shoulders here. But he handled it really well last year. And, part of what he had told me is he remembers getting benched last year. Our conversation started with, how different is it this year, kind of having no competition and knowing you're the guy going in? He's like, I don't feel that way. I remember getting benched against Minnesota week 8. I don't in any way feel comfortable. Like, I have to go and prove it every day. But then, Grant, it morphs into, and I remember when he was drafted in the 7th round, that there was a knee injury that really cost him most of his camp, his preseason. It was only the last preseason game where he finally got in, played 50 snaps against the Kansas City Chiefs, and played well enough to put him on the roster as kind of a surprise addition. It didn't look like Rasheed Walker was going to be placed on the roster. And I had no idea how severe that knee injury actually was. Rasheed Walker told me that it was to the point where it had an OCD lesion, and there was no blood circulating to the knee, and the bone was essentially dying. And doctors told him, you're not going to be able to play football again. Like, you have to have surgery to get this fixed. And even then, you're probably not going to play football again. And he's like, well, if I'm not going to play football again with or without the surgery, I think any of us would take the lesser invasive option and just try to make it happen. And that's what he was able to do. So I think one of the really interesting things with Rasheed Walker, forever in his career, as long as he's the Packers starting left tackle, the Packers are going to have a former 7th round pick starting at left tackle. But that's really a misnomer. His talent level was never a day 3. It was always higher than that in terms of pure raw talent. The reason he was a 7th round pick, as Brian Gutekunst told me, he fell because of the knee. Because even at the draft in 2022, it was uncertain whether he was ever going to be able to play football again. And he's bucked the odds, and he's overcome. And here he is starting on the blind side and protecting Jordan Love. It's been a remarkable journey, and now it's his spot. He's that guy. Can he be the cornerstone guy? That's what 2024 is about.
Well, and what a cool story, and what a cool place for him to end up too, right? A team that loves finding their linemen in later rounds and has a process and has, like, it's just cool when it works out for players and teams like that. And I didn't know anything about the knee before I read your story, and I was like, wow, I knew that there was all these guys have, red flag here, red flag there in the draft, especially ones going in later rounds. But that's a really cool story. I would recommend everyone go read it. He's on Twitter @ByRyanWood. Ryan, I appreciate the time. You're always so generous with Bill's show. When we need someone, and with roster cut downs tomorrow, I know you're busy. So thank you so much for the time.
Absolutely. Anytime. Take care.
That's Ryan Wood, PackersNews.com. He's on Twitter @ByRyanWood. I'm thinking more. I'm learning more. I've processed this Malik Willis trade. I'm ready to talk about it when we come back. I got a 3-minute break. Your calls and texts, 608-321-1670. If you want to add in on anything that I talked about with Ryan, the kicker, backup quarterback, and now Malik Willis, has been acquired for a 7th round pick as well, which I'll just give me your thoughts on it next. Stick around. 3 minutes. We'll be back. It's the Wisco Sports Show.
This is the Wisco Sports Show with Grant Bills on the Wisconsin Sports Zone Radio Network.
The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 3 minutes. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 2 minutes. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 1 minute. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 30 seconds.
It's the Wisco Sports Show. My name is Grant Bills. A little bit of breaking news. Cone Roller actually broke it. Per Cone Roller, the Packers were trading a 7th-round pick for Malik Willis. And honestly, I almost just slipped up and said Deshaun Kaiser because this feels like the exact same thing. It's fine. I'm not going to lose my mind over it. It's just, this is classic Packers, and we can discuss further. You can call and text. I would love your takes. 608-321-1670. You can tweet me at Wisco Grant as well. You can comment on the live stream. Lots of ways to chime in on the show. And I just want to make sure that I'm not missing. Bobby in Menominee texts in, says, what's Matt Flynn up to? Well, if we're getting calls for Mason Crosby, like it's not that different. It's not that different at all. It kind of feels similar. Like both are old, both are done. But for whatever reason, we can't let go of Mason Crosby. The Packers trading a 7th rounder for Malik Willis. It's not about the 7th rounder. It's whatever. It's a throwaway pick. I with those day 3 picks, like if you want to use one on a kicker, we talked about this earlier today, whatever. I'm not going to complain. If you want to trade a 7th to make sure that you don't miss out on Malik Willis on the waiver deadline, whatever. That's fine. It's just the Packers understand, obviously, in making this move, that they need to get better at backup quarterback. Okay. That Sean Clifford is a college prospect who wasn't that great of a prospect in most people's eyes, is not translated to the NFL. Michael Pratt is young, unpolished, don't really know what we have. Okay. Brian Gutekunst realizes that, says we need to improve the quarterback room. And what he does is trade for a guy who is a prospect at college who also hasn't translated to the NFL level. so we get a slightly older version of Sean Clifford? Is that what we did here? Do you know the expression, why buy the cow when you can get the milk for free? The Packers with quarterbacks, it's the opposite. It's like, why would we buy the milk? I could simply buy a cow and build a barn and grow its food and milk it every day, and maybe the milk will be good. It's like, well, no, we don't need all that, though. We just need a bottle of milk. That's all we need. You just want to go out and buy the milk? Oh, no, we'll develop our own milk. It's like, God. Like, maybe Malik Willis is a fine backup quarterback. I just know there are other quarterbacks. It doesn't even have to be a veteran backup. Like, that's a cliche that gets thrown around and that gets overused because there aren't that many options. But it's so clear that you need help at backup quarterback, and yet you kind of got another Deshaun Kaiser, a slightly older, bigger, stronger Sean Clifford. It's just, that tweet or that viral theme where people will say, like, men will literally do anything to avoid going to therapy. The Packers will do literally anything to just avoid signing a respectable backup quarterback. That's it. That's all you need. It's clear that you need backup help. In making this move, the Packers realize that. Brian Gutekunst realizes that. Malik Willis is fine. It's just, why do we work so hard? We're going to draft and develop Sean Clifford. We're going to draft and develop Michael Pratt. Now we're going to trade for and develop Malik Willis. Why don't we just get one veteran backup quarterback? And I know I try not to use that phrase, but what if we just sign one? Doesn't even cost us any picks. Costs a couple $1 million, but the team is cheap right now anyways. Why don't we just do that? Do you know what I mean? It's just a little obnoxious. It's like they're trying to work so hard to accomplish a task that really shouldn't be that difficult. You know what I mean? It's the opposite of why buy the cow when you can get the milk for free. Why buy the milk when you can get a cow and build a barn and grow its food and milk it every morning and get all the equipment to pasteurize and to process, and maybe at the end of the day, after all that work and all those resources, you'll end up with a bottle of milk. Maybe. Just buy the milk, Brian. Hour 2, Wisco Sports Show next.
This is a Wisconsin Sports Zone update.
Well, it turns out Jordan Love's apparent backup was not actually on the Packers roster just yet. That's after the team has reportedly agreed to acquire Tennessee quarterback Malik Willis in exchange for a 7th-round pick in next year's draft, a 3rd-round pick back in 2022. Willis has played in 11 games in his career, throwing for 350 yards, no touchdowns, 3 interceptions. Also presents a threat on the ground where he's run for 144 yards and a score over the last 2 years. He had a solid preseason for the Titans, going 20 for 27 for 205 yards with 2 touchdowns, 1 interception. He will presumably serve as Love's backup over last year's backup Sean Clifford and rookie Michael Pratt. Coach Matt LaFleur was asked after Saturday's preseason finale if they could win games with Clifford or Pratt as the backup to Love. His answer suggested something else could be in the works.
Again, I think it's similar to the kicking competition in terms of there were some really good moments, and then there's some things that we absolutely have to do better, and then we'll evaluate everything that's out there for us.
While the quarterback battle appears settled, the kicking battle remains a question with Anders Carlson and Greg Joseph the options. Packers must have the roster down to 53 players by 3 p.m. tomorrow.
Rural Mutual Insurance, keeping Wisconsin strong.
When a company only does business in Wisconsin, that's Wisconsin Strong. Rural Mutual provides all lines of insurance, including commercial, farm, home, and auto. And your premiums stay right here to keep Wisconsin strong. Local agents, local underwriters, local claims adjusters.
Rural Mutual Insurance, keeping Wisconsin strong.
Well, Wisconsin will get their season going on Friday night against Western Michigan. They will do so as an unranked team for the first time since 2016. Kick on Friday night slated for 8. And the Brewers are off tonight. They're going to open up a series tomorrow night against the Giants. With this Wisconsin Sports Zone Network update, I'm Zach Heil, Print.
It's a unique deal in regards to the timing of our game, being that it's on a Friday. They'll be off Sunday, Monday, Tuesday, and then we'll bring them back in Wednesday and we'll get together.
This is where Wisconsin gathers to talk sports. Packers, Brewers, Badgers, Bucks. The Wisco Sports Show is on the air. Now, here's your host, Grant Bills.
608-321-1670. Would love to get your thoughts on the Packers adding Malik Willis. I mean, it makes sense, right? These are the types of trades that we see happen right before roster cutdowns. It's like he's probably going to get cut anyway, but the Packers really wanted him. So we'll give up a 7th-round pick just to kind of ensure it. Just call it like a guarantee tax. Like, this is the tax we're going to pay to guarantee that we get the guy that we want. Just in case another team ahead of us on waivers or would have wanted to get him instead, right? I'm not anti-Malik Willis. I'm not anti-giving up a 7th-round pick. It just, the expression, work smarter, not harder. This is the opposite. This is working harder, not smarter. And I understand that there are only so many good veteran backups in the NFL. I get it. And the good ones cost a little money. I get it. All right? It's just like we are in this backup quarterback quandary because we thought that we could draft and develop Sean Clifford. And I say we, I'm an owner. I can say we. But the Packers are in this quandary because they thought they could draft and develop Sean Clifford. A player, by the way, the consensus board had probably as an undrafted free agent, not a 5th-rounder. In fact, Ben Kenny, he texted me, said, pour one out for Sean Clifford. He sucks. I'm like, well, he kind of sucked in college. A lot of people thought he did, but whatever. Packers thought they saw something and we're going to draft him. We're going to develop him. It hasn't worked out. Is it okay? We're going to add more to our quarterback room. We're going to draft and develop Michael Pratt. And the book is not closed on Michael Pratt yet. But the book that we need in 2024 needs to be a good backup quarterback or a serviceable backup quarterback. Michael Pratt is neither. Sean Clifford is neither. So the Packers have gotten themselves into a little bit of a backup quarterback issue by trying to draft and develop backup quarterbacks. So to solve this problem, they trade for another team's guy who they think they can develop. It's like, why are we doing all this? This is working harder, not smarter. This is the opposite of why buy the cow when you can get the milk for free. This is, instead of just buying a bottle of milk, we're buying a cow and building a barn and growing the cow's food and waking up every morning at 4:00 to milk it and then having the pasteurization tanks and running it through and then bottling it and sanitizing it. You spray hot water and it's a whole thing. And at the end of all of this, after all of this time and all these resources have been spent, we might have a good bottle of milk. Or we mess it up. Or the cow is never that good in the first place. Maybe we bought a cow that it's dry. The udder doesn't work. That could be Malik Willis. So I just, it's not an anti-Malik Willis thing. It's fine. It's not anti-spending a 7th-round pick. That's fine. That's such a small price to pay. But it's so clear and obvious that the Packers aren't set at backup quarterback. So why are we trying to solve this problem by taking the same measure that got us into this problem? That's my reaction to this, right? Malik Willis is fine. 7th-round pick is fine. It's just the Packers, through trying to draft and develop backups, developmental quarterbacks don't always equal good backup quarterbacks. And so we talked about with Ryan Wood about a half hour ago, right? So that's what makes my eyebrow go up. That's what makes me question what we're doing here a little bit. You know what I mean? If you need a backup quarterback, just go get a bona fide backup quarterback. You don't have to make everything from scratch. I saw a story. Can you give me a moment to Google something? Man makes chicken sandwich from scratch. Did any of you see this story? A man made a chicken sandwich, including raising the chicken, growing the wheat for the bread, doing all of it. It cost him $1,500, and it took him 6 months. He could have bought a chicken sandwich in 15 minutes for $5. And I know he did it to make a point, but that kind of feels like how the Packers are trying to find their backup quarterback. It's like, well, we'll buy the chicken and grow the wheat and spend all the time. Just go to the grocery store and buy a chicken sandwich, for God's sake. They're out there. Yeah, they might cost a little bit, but oh my God. Let's take some calls. 608-321-1670. It's the Wisco Sports Show. Who's this?
Grant, how are you doing?
I'm doing good, Vagabond John. How are you?
I've been going through the same experience trying to make this damn sourdough bread, and I know this is not the first time I've called about it.
I think it's the
this network.
second. It's not like it's not that obnoxious. It is the second time you've referenced your bread, but you can get 2 bread mentions.
We're not approaching Lost Wallet territory, okay? So, this is
That wasn't my fault. That wasn't my fault, but fine. Touche.
We're not approaching football territory either. But, making sourdough bread is an absolute pain in the ass. It takes forever. You got to wait so long in between each stage. And if you mess it up, right, if you have to start over again, you're really starting from scratch. And you have no idea what's going to happen this time around. And I think you're spot on kind of with this backup quarterback. I think the problem this year specifically is I can't name my alternative outside of Mike White. And I'm not confident that Mike White is $3 million better than Malik Willis. I think that's where I'm getting okay with this backup quarterback situation. I think that's why I would prefer the Malik Willis move over Mike White, because Mike White would literally be $3 million more than Malik Willis. Is that fair?
Yeah, that's fair. I guess if the Packers are clear and your phone connection stinks, Vagabond John, and the phone lines are loaded, so I'm gonna leave it there. We'll talk more about it throughout this week. I have no doubt that you're gonna call in again. I understand, and that's going to be the pushback to what I'm saying is, well, who did you want the Packers to go sign? Well, nobody's out there. I get it, okay? In fact, that's the type of thing that I always preach when people call in and say, why don't they sign a veteran backup? And I always say, well, who and for what? I get it. It's just we're working so hard to try to find a backup quarterback when I don't think it should be this hard, okay? And if you want to try to cornhole me on dollars and cents and contract. Okay, fine. But in the big picture, you understand what I'm saying, right? Okay, loaded phone lines. There's 3 of you, 2 minutes apiece tops. I promise I can get to you all if you just give me a couple minutes. 608-321-1670. Wisco Sports Show. Who's this?
Grant, it's Q, and I'm going to try and cornhole you here.
Okay. I don't know why I used that word.
Those are your words.
Yeah, I know. I was my fault. What do you think? Hit me.
So I think that the Packers offensive coaches like to work with quarterbacks. Like, they like to develop guys. They gave up on Clifford. They think he's trash. Like, he proved that this offseason and preseason. So they're bringing another project in-house. And this move does not stop them from signing or trading for a vet if Love were to go down. It's kind of like with your car. You were going to drive that thing into the ground. You didn't need to have like the next car in your garage. Like, you just knew if your car broke, you were going to get a replacement then. Like, Malik Willis is not going to be starting for the Packers for 4 or 5 weeks. If we need somebody for 4 or 5 weeks, then we'll get that person when we need them.
Okay. So okay. I think I know what you're saying, Q. And this is something that I've said, too, in discussions around Sean Clifford and Michael Pratt. Well, it's like, well, if Jordan Love goes down for an extended period of time, they're going to bring in somebody anyways. Okay, so is that still true? Because that just shows me that we're just developing quarterbacks who aren't really going to be the backup. Okay, I get it. Like, you should be developing quarterbacks. And honestly, that probably creates on some level a healthy quarterback room, keeps your coaches engaged. It's productive. Okay, sure. It's like, well, if Jordan Love goes down, they'll just acquire somebody anyways. Okay. And maybe that's smart. Why make a trade for a veteran backup if you don't need one, if you don't have to, right? Wait until you actually need one, and then you can make the move. Okay. I guess I can see that a little bit too. Those are good points, Q. 608-321-1670. Wisco Sports Show. Who's this?
This is Brian.
Brian. What's up, Brian? Where are you calling from, Brian?
Calling from the road.
Calling from the road.
Up to the Dells.
Brian on the road. Ooh, nice area of the state. Well, what do you think, Brian?
All right, so I got multiple things.
Okay.
First, the Packers have a long history of getting guys, developing them, and then they're successful elsewhere. Aaron Brooks, Mark Brunell, Hasselbeck, even Flynn, drafting guys, getting guys with the right attributes every year and developing them. It's kind of, Packers have been pretty good at that.
Yep.
Letting guys get on the bench develop. And there's going to be misses in there. Now, Malik Willis, now the year of his draft, he was being talked up as a possible first-round pick due to his athleticism and his attributes. So to get him for pennies on the dollar, yeah, that's not too shabby. And just admit you got a sunk cost loss with Clifford. maybe stash Pratt on the practice squad. But the last part of like what you were saying is, the quarterback situation in the NFL is not the best. There's not a plethora of highly skilled, startable quarterbacks just sitting there waiting. Like, God, I hope the Packers would call me. Like, there's not a lot available, and the ones that aren't know their worth. And so, like the previous caller said, if we need to break the glass in case of emergency and call up Tannehill or Mike White and say, okay, we'll finally meet your price now that we're desperate, kind of roll the dice, and hopefully we won't be in that situation.
So those are all excellent points. The one pushback that I would make, and Brian on the road, it was nice to, I don't know if we've chatted before, and if we have, I don't remember, I'm sorry. So thank you for the call. The one excellent point that you made, the Packers have always done this. They've always done this. Going back to Brunell and Brooks, let's just speak within the last 15 years, okay? In the last 15 years, some of their big draft and develop projects were Brett Hundley and Deshaun Kaiser. And both of those guys failed miserably as actual backup quarterback options when pressed into service when Aaron Rodgers got injured. Okay? So that's my hesitancy a little bit. I have no problem with drafting and developing quarterbacks, right? I don't have a problem with them trading a 7th for Malik Willis. That's not a ton of draft. It's nothing. You're basically getting him on waivers. It's a little bit of a tax to ensure that you get him. I don't have a problem with that. If the goal is to eventually have an effective backup quarterback that can go in and maybe win you a game or two if Jordan Love has to miss time, none of this seems to be effective, at least in recent memory. When Rodgers went down, we got a little Deshaun Kaiser. Before that, we got a little Brett Hundley. Both were catastrophes. Those were developmental projects. None of them were any good. You know what I mean? So developmental quarterback, sure. Backup quarterback, it's a different thing. Sometimes they can be the same player. I think sometimes they have to be different players. The Packers have 3 developmental quarterback on their rosters. I'm not sure they have a single backup, although Malik Willis is closer than Sean Clifford, but incrementally so. And I guess you get what you pay for. An incremental improvement, 7th round pick. That's fine. 608-321-1670. Going to keep the calls rolling. Wisco Sports Show. Who's this?
Hey, how's it going, Grant?
It's going great. Who's this?
Tommy and Madison.
Tommy. What's up, Tommy? Welcome.
How are you doing?
I'm doing great.
Hey, what's going on? You had to bring up Brett Hundley. I forgot about him. That was terrible.
Well, isn't Brett Hundley was a 5th round pick, I believe, like Clifford. Kaiser was they traded for him from Cleveland. It's just those two players seem so front of mind right now. That's why I bring them up.
I hear you. I am more of Brian's line of thinking where, listen, they played roulette. They threw out a big risk, and it didn't work. They have a strategical advantage over other organizations that develop quarterbacks. It did not work, and with the 3 people you mentioned, it did not work. You say they're spending a lot of resources and a lot of time. I don't think a 5th round draft pick and trying to find someone who could potentially be a huge upside, as quarterbacks can be depending on how they develop, is that big of a risk and that big of a waste of time. And I think I'm happy they take risks like that. I'm not disappointed by it.
Okay. So
Did it work?
It's fair. Well, yeah, right. Process and results, those can be 2 different things. I appreciate the call, right? We need to separate process from results. I like the process of getting quarterbacks, getting them in your hopper, developing them. That's good process. That means a healthy organization, right? I get all of that. And you're right. They're not giving up 1st, 2nd, 3rd round picks on these quarterbacks. They're giving up later picks. That's fine. My question is, if any of these backups are actually pressed into service, are any of them going to be able to play at all? So the process is one thing. I don't mind the process is fine. I don't mind it. Again, I'm not anti Malik Willis. I'm not anti giving up a 7th round pick. Okay. We can all agree on that. Not anti-process. But if the rubber on these backup quarterbacks has to hit the road, I'm still not convinced they have a guy that can play at all. I think Malik Willis has a slightly better chance than Sean Clifford and Michael Pratt. They're not that much better. So that's the disconnect. And by the way, all these calls have made excellent points. I'm not even that against this. I don't know that I'm against it at all. I'm just pressing a little bit and asking questions a little bit, because it seems like the Packers will do everything in their power to sign or to get a backup quarterback, except for actually identifying and just getting a backup that's already a backup. You know what I mean? It's like they're trying to build the whole chicken sandwich from scratch. It's like, just Christ, just go buy a chicken sandwich. 608-321-1670. Wisco Sports Show. Who's this?
Hey, Grant. Darnell.
Hey, Darnell. What's going on?
Hey,
This is a wonderful discourse, by the way.
I love this. I didn't expect this to be part of the show tonight. This is such an interesting topic.
And I'd love to add a little bit to it. So we're talking Packers backup quarterbacks. I think that we as Packer fans, first off, are incredibly spoiled when it comes to quarterback plays in general over the last 30 plus years.
Most would agree.
And mostly, right. And I think that having a bad backup quarterback is really a Packer-centric problem. Like, it doesn't necessarily mean that all of our backup quarterbacks are that bad. It's that they were so bad compared with the legendary Hall of Fame quarterback play that we were used to watching.
That's not a bad take. That's something that nobody's mentioned yet, is we can't watch and consume videotape of backup quarterbacks because the gap between the guys that we normally watch and the backups is so far, it's like our brains are tainted. Is that what you're saying? That's an interesting take. I like that.
I mean, that's one thing. But then on top of that, you only have to go back a little bit further to find really quality guys that the Packers have groomed as backups. I always go back to Matt Flynn because by far one of my favorite games that I've ever watched was Matt Flynn torching the Lions.
Yep.
And that was great. If Russell Wilson didn't get drafted by the Seahawks, Matt Flynn would have been their quarterback for probably 5 to 7 years. And that's just my opinion there. But then on top of that, Matt Hasselbeck, he was a backup to Brett Favre, so the backup quarterback issue with the Packers, I really do think that's only because we've had such insanely good starting quarterback play that all these backups just look like crap when they're compared with Aaron Rodgers or Brett Favre, or in this case, Jordan Love.
Yeah. So Darnell and I, there were some great takes there. Everyone's bringing a little something different. I appreciate it, Darnell. And by the way, I actually understand the origin of your nickname now after seeing that episode of The Office the other night where Creed goes, Darnell's a chump. I've done way more for way less. I'm like, I was watching it at home. I was the Leo DiCaprio meme pointing at the TV. I was like, that's probably why he goes by Darnell the chump. Look, Hasselbeck, great. He was Favre's backup, but Favre never got hurt. And then Hasselbeck went on to play for Seattle, which is great. It's like, okay, so it's nice that the Packers can find these guys and develop them. And then they go on to, have success elsewhere. That's nice because as Packers fans, we can claim, hey, they started here. That's cool. Is that helping us? Is that helping us win games? Is that helping us get closer to actually winning a Super Bowl with Jordan Love and this team? I know it's not actively hurting them, right? At least I don't think so, unless you want to make the point, well, that 5th round pick that went to Sean Clifford could have used that on a okay, well, whatever. Then we'll agree to disagree on that. I don't think it's actively hurting them. I just don't know that it's benefiting them on the level that a lot of Packers people say, right? Q on the live stream says, we got to stop saying groomed. We developed. We're going to say developed. Q says, you're saying we can't develop backup quarterbacks. We have Jordan Love. Jordan Love was a 1st round pick, right? And Andrew Brandt would tweet it like once a month for 3 years. It's like, you don't draft someone in the 1st round for them to be a backup, for them to sit. They were always going to start Jordan Love unless he just sucked, right? The idea was, well, he needs a year or 2. They didn't think they'd have to keep him for 3 because they didn't think Rodgers would be good for that long, but they did. Love was not Sean Clifford. Sean Clifford, if the Packers didn't draft him, probably would have gone undrafted. I think someone would have taken Jordan Love. Maybe it wouldn't have been at pick 27 or, right after the Packers pick or wherever that was. If you're on hold, I want to get to you. I promise I'll get to you, but I need to take a break. Otherwise, we're going to be all out of whack, and Kurt Hogg's going to join us later. We got to stay on schedule. So 3 minutes. We'll come back. I'll take your calls, more of your thoughts. It's the Wisco Sports Show. Back after this.
This is the Wisco Sports Show with Grant Bills on the Wisconsin Sports Zone Radio Network.
The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 3 minutes. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 2 minutes. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 1 minute. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 30 seconds.
Wisco Sports Show. My name is Grant Bills, reacting to a little Packers breaking news. We're going to switch gears back into the Brewers to end the show. Kurt Hogg of the Journal Sentinel joined me on Bill's show earlier today. I was filling in Bill's stead. He was off at the Fisher House golf outing, I believe, raising money there today, out in the heat, too. I actually don't envy Bill. He had the day off, but he was still probably working, shaking hands, kissing babies, and sweating. So I've been in an air-conditioned studio all day. You'll hear that conversation I had with Kurt in just a little bit. Breaking news is the Packers have traded a 7th-round pick for Malik Willis. I'm not anti-Malik Willis. I'm not anti-giving up a 7th-round pick. This just seems to me like the opposite of work smarter, not harder. It's like they're working harder to find a backup quarterback, not smarter. Just like, okay, so we have another developmental project. Are we any closer to having a guy who can actually play on a Sunday if Jordan Love goes down? Maybe. I think they're closer. I don't know how much closer. They're closer. I still don't know they're in a great spot if Jordan Love gets dinged and has to miss some time, and that's my concern. 608-321-1670. Let's take some more calls. Wisco Sports Show. Who's this? Hello?
Hey, Grant.
Howdy.
Can you hear me?
I got you loud and clear. Who is this?
Second cousin Mike.
Hey, Mike. Sorry I didn't pick out your voice. What's going on?
Well, you got to settle down. Your last callers had a lot of good points.
They did. I gave them all credit. I thought they all brought at least one good point to the table in support of what the Packers are doing with this trade. And I like that.
Well, I don't even mean the trade. We drafted and developed 3 years ago. Did you think Jordan Love was going to be a good backup? Because we trusted him.
The thing is, okay, so the thing is with Jordan Love, right, is he wasn't drafted as a guy who was pro-ready. He was going to need work. They were going to need to develop him for a while. Remember, he didn't even suit up his rookie year. He wasn't the backup until year 2. And in year 2, when he had to play when Rodgers went down, he wasn't any good. So I don't think Jordan Love is a good example because they were developing him to start one day, not necessarily to be a backup. Backups kind of need to be good right now if they're pressed into service. That's the difference, you know, Mike?
Yeah, no, I agree, but you were too young for this. Who'd the Packers sign when Favre won the Super Bowl?
What, Jim McMahon?
Late in the season. Yeah.
But but at that point, that's a good example. Jim McMahon had won a Super Bowl. Like, he had been around. That's a backup.
But they didn't hold him for the entire season. They signed him late.
So you're saying if they need someone and they're pressed into a bad spot, they could always sign some version of Jim McMahon later this year. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
Okay. God, everyone's making good points.
I mean, the Packers have done very well at drafting and developing.
They have. Now, they've had misses, and Mike, I appreciate it. We just have jammed phone lines. Second cousin Mike in Elk Mound, our resident Elk Mound caller. Look, everyone's bringing great points to the table. I'm not anti. It's not like I'm that mad about this trade. It just kind of has me rolling my eyes. It just seems like another Sean Clifford, another Michael Pratt, another DeShone Kizer, another Brett Hundley to solve a problem that was created because the front office was so obsessed with finding Brett Hundley, finding DeShone Kizer, finding Sean Clifford, finding Michael Pratt. It seems like we're adding further to our problem, not necessarily fixing it, right? And yeah, they've been good at drafting and developing quarterback. They've been fine at it. Like Jordan Love was one, but Brett Hundley stunk when he needed to play, and DeShone Kizer stunk when he needed to play. So yes, way back in the day, they had a good run. I don't know that in the last decade that's been true. But there were the Jim McMahon point is a good one. But he was a veteran. Like if they acquire someone like Joe Flacco later this year, okay, well then there's your Jim McMahon. That's a great comparison. So yes, I'm understanding that if Jordan Love goes down, they could always circle back and get someone else. Totally. I'm coming at this thing from all angles. We're breaking this down. 608-321-1670. Wisco Sports Show. Who's this? All right, sounds like that caller dropped off to line one. This is our last caller. Wisco Sports Show. Hello, who's this?
Gordon in La Crosse.
Gordon in La Crosse. What's up, Gordon?
I'd say with the Packers, if this is really like a Super Bowl or bust year, which in my opinion it is, you'd want a good backup QB and not someone who's going to be wait and see trade or wait and see, develop QB. Like I'd want a Tannehill or a Flacco, someone you can come in and make the throws when you need it. Like I think our running backs this year are going to be good enough to where we could easily just coast into the playoffs if we were already like halfway through the season without Love. So
you're saying this is fine. If they need a guy later this year, they can circle back. They can trade. They can sign.
I think they sign someone now because who's to say like Jared Goff or Dak Prescott or someone doesn't go down and they have to go sign Flacco or Tannehill.
A preemptive signing before somebody else gets hurt.
Gotcha. I think it's better to have someone now before someone else scoops them up.
So that's an interesting spin. That's the gamble that you run, right? And I appreciate that, Gordon. That'll be the last caller. We're going to take a break here and get to Kurt, wrap up the show with some Brewers talk. I understand why the Packers do it this way. I do. I totally get it. I think it keeps a healthy environment in the quarterback room where there's developing, there's growth, there's teaching. I think that's an environment that I want my team to have. I don't want things to get stale. I co-sign that. When the rubber hits the road, though, can these guys play? And the rubber might not have to hit the road. In fact, I hope the rubber never hits the road because I hope Jordan Love is great and he never gets hurt, right? But I think in acquiring Malik Willis, the Packers are admitting a little bit publicly, this isn't good enough. We need to address it further. And I think they went out and they got Dallas Keuchel to add to a rotation that already had Bryce Wilson and, fill in the blank, whoever. They just got a lot more of the same. Just fine. If they need a backup middle of the year, then they could always acquire one. We're going to talk Brewers with Kurt Hogg, the Milwaukee Journal-Sentinel, coming up next. I thought they had a nice weekend. I know they lost yesterday, but I give them a lot of credit for winning 2 or 3. We'll talk about some of the reasons why next. Kurt joins me next. It's the Wisco Sports Show.
This is the Wisco Sports Show with Grant Bills on the Wisconsin Sports Zone Radio Network.
The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 5 minutes. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 4 minutes. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 3 minutes. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 2 minutes. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 1 minute. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 30 seconds.
It's the Wisco Sports Show, Malik Willis Day. On the Wisco Sports Show, Packers acquire Malik Willis for a 7th-round pick. Not bad. Not anti-7th-round pick, not anti-Malik Willis. I just sometimes wonder why the Packers treat backup quarterbacks the way that they do. It's like they work so hard. And I don't know that they have to, but I can appreciate it, and I like the fact that they're always working on developing a quarterback. I don't think that's a bad thing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I've said this a couple times already. All right, now you're going to hear a conversation I had with Kurt Hogg earlier today on the Bill Michaels Show, and I'm actually going to play it from the beginning of that segment. So you're going to hear, well, you're going to hear the music, you're going to hear the bumper, you're going to hear all that, but I'm just going to play it from the beginning because I think that's what's easiest. So
the credit goes to the A's. You know, he had the same stuff. He just threw balls in the middle of the plate and they hit it. They did a great job and they stayed disciplined and got the pitches they want and got 4 hits in that inning and a couple walks, and that's how that stuff happens.
It's Pat Murphy yesterday. I always like his commentary after a game. He didn't take the bait, didn't take the cheese. Sophia Menard's like, hey, how about that umpiring? He's like, yeah, it was bad, but we also didn't have many good at-bats and, you know, didn't put guys in scoring position. I think the series as a whole over the weekend, I'm actually very pleased with it. And I said that at 10 o'clock again when we kind of reset the show at 11. And we can talk about it more now with Kurt Hogg. Kurt from the Journal Sentinel joins us, and you can see him over on the live stream as well. Bill, by the way, off today, which is why I'm filling in, hosting the show from here, which means I can bring people on video with me. Kurt, hello. Can you hear me? See me okay?
I can hear you. Unfortunately, I can see you well, too.
I listened to you. I could hear you this morning. It is Monday, which means I listened to the Micro Brew podcast with you and JR on my way in. It was nice to hear about your adventures to Nashville. You just drove down there to watch and to talk to some sounds people last week?
Well, yeah, I mean, there's some content coming, but effectively it was a one-day trip to Nashville to acquire the contents of said content.
It's coming up. We look forward to that.
Yeah.
Yoho,
Maybe tomorrow
Wizarowski.
morning something could be dropping.
Look forward to that at the Journal Sentinel. I look forward to that. Aaron Ashby, you texted me and we were going back and forth a little bit. You're like, guys down in Nashville are like, they're blown away by this guy. Like, is it just a matter of, and he looked great yesterday, albeit in a loss, although it kind of felt like a win. It was close. They'd already won the series, and now we have healthy Ashby. So I'd rather take 2 out of 3 and maybe the return of Aaron Ashby throwing 98. I don't know. That's how I at least talked myself into yesterday. Everyone was excited about him. It just seems like he's kind of found his groove after being lost in the pitching wilderness after his injury.
Yeah, well, first off, I want you to know that as people were like unprompted in Nashville telling me about Aaron Ashby, I had your face in my mind, a pleasant picture. I was like, I can't wait to text this to Grant. Aaron Ashby is back? ? I mean, really, they took 3 out of 3 in the Oakland series in your mind, probably, right?
That's
they
what I'm
won
saying.
2 games, and then Aaron Ashby pitched well in the 3rd.
Good enough for a win.
The
They only lost by 1 with CB Buckner.
It could have been, without CB Buckner, it could have been a Brewers win and an Aaron Ashby hold. You might not be able to host the show today because you just in no emotional state to speak words.
No, I couldn't speak legibly about it. I mean, the series as a whole, I think people thought, well, you got to take 2 or 3 from the Athletics. They stink. They're terrible. And look, they're 20 games under. They're not as good as the Brewers. But the last 2 months, they've been better. They were over 500 in July. They're about 500 in August. I just could see this team going into Oakland, unfamiliar environment, uncommon opponent, weird times, and just being asleep a little bit and being caught. But they showed up and they slugged on Friday. And then Saturday, Kurt, just the at-bats. They're just working. So, like, they were dialed in. They showed up ready this weekend, and I continue to be impressed at how this team never really takes nights off or series off. You know what I mean?
Yeah, that's the most impressive thing about this team is they have not lost 4 games in a row. The most impressive thing is that they don't stink.
Yeah.
Like, when they're bad, they usually get over it within a couple days or the next day. I don't really know how, like, you draw that up, what exact skill that is, but it's definitely something that they do. And I talked about this on the pod that, as you mentioned at the start of this segment, like, that's something that is important if you can make it to 5 or 7 games in a series, because they probably won't have more than 1 clunker. Like, they just don't play clunkers.
Yeah.
And again, I don't know what the underlying skill is in that, but they fight, they scratch, they claw. A lot of time they just put together really good at bats up and down the order, and that's kind of the thing they do best.
Well, that's the thing that I mentioned earlier on in the show. It's like, so Friday night, they hammered the ball, and they can do that. Home runs, huge bases loaded triple from Gary Sanchez. Saturday night, they had 2 3-run innings, and I have it in front of me. I don't need to list it out to you, but single walk, infield single, fielder's choice RBI, infield single RBI, like, without really hitting the ball out of the infield. And you know what I thought of, Kurt? And maybe this is unfair to our previous Skip manager, is you'd have games with Counsell where the offense didn't do enough, and then he'd come to the desk and he'd say, look, we had guys on, we had opportunities, we just didn't get that big hit, you know? And I don't think that's wrong. I don't think that anything Counsell says is wrong. It's like, that is baseball sometimes. But this team sometimes, like, they don't require the big hit. Some days yesterday they could have used a big hit or 2, but like Saturday, man, they were stacking up runs because they were gritty as hell, and without even really the ball leaving the infield, they found a way to put runs together without that big hit. That's what I thought of.
Yeah, they did that. They had like a month or 2 months at the end of last year where they were kind of like small balling their way to a lot of success. But even that, if you looked into it, was not super sustainable. Like, they were really getting lucky. It doesn't feel like this year's offense. I mean, they're probably a top 10 unit in baseball, despite not hitting a ton of home runs. It's not because they're lucky. They can get lucky in some instances. Saturday, maybe they caught a couple breaks here or there. But on the whole, these games where they'll score 7-8 runs, it's like dinking and dunking without dinking and dunking, if that makes sense. Like, we're at the point where this is kind of what they do, and then, you know, once every few games, they'll really bring out the big bats, and like those are the games where Hoskins homers or Contreras homers. it just gives them like in 1 through 9, sort of like we talked about, where they don't have a really big weak hole. It gives you a lot of different ways to be successful.
Yeah. And it's fun to watch. It's fun to consume. It's fun to follow and to write about and talk about because they can look so different night to night and they can win different ways. And yesterday, I think Murphy after the game is like, look, it was a lot of fly balls and pop-ups, which to me is like, we weren't digging in for long at bats. We weren't seeing lots of pitches. And that's when this team has failed and lost games. That's typically what it looks like. Kurt Hogg is here. Journal Sentinel. You know what's a huge bummer? The Yelich injury. So it sucks. But you know what? What I've thought about more since his injury is, you know what, Kurt? This lineup is perfect if you could just have Yelich in the 3-hole.
Yeah.
Like Terang Churio 1-2 is perfect. Now that Contreras has found a little power, him at 4, Adames is the perfect 5 hitter. You don't have to rely on him every night. The problem is they don't have the 3 guy. So what do we do?
I'm not sure.
Gary Sanchez hitting 3 in a playoff game. Could that happen?
I do think Gary Sanchez deserves some credit, some respect. Like since coming back from his injury, when was that? Like a month and a half ago, maybe a month ago.
Something like that.
His OPS around like 950. Overall, he's been pretty much exactly what you would have hoped he would be.
Yeah.
And if he's gonna hit like this, yeah, probably play him a lot. He draws his walks. He's still got a ton of power. The bat speed is not lost. I see your eyes. You're like lighting up. You're like, give me more Gary. Yeah. The outfield is gonna like, these questions are still gonna be there, I think, in a month, because the outside of Churio, the 3 other guys that you are relying on heavily to play every day, 2 of those guys effectively have to play every day. They all have major question marks somewhere within their offensive profile. Perkins, Frelick, Mitchell. And I'm not sure that maybe in the next month something happens to quench those questions, but like they're kind of like the questions are central to sort of who they are as offensive players. Sal Frelick is not a power hitter. Garrett Mitchell's like has the fastballs up in the zone is an issue. It just feels like these are still going to be questions in a month from now when the playoffs start. So that's probably a concern. But then again, in a short series, who's to say Sal Frelick doesn't like run a 500 batting average on balls in play? Like he just dinks and dunks his way to a couple of 3-hit games.
Look, at least he doesn't strike out a ton. Like Garrett Mitchell, the strikeouts they're just maddening sometimes. And again, they wouldn't be maddening if the power was there, but it's not, which is why his offensive profile is a little tricky. It's like we're trying to carve out the best outcomes in there, and there's just not a lot of space. That's not a large part of his offensive pie.
Yeah, that's the offensive pie. Pie in the sky.
Yeah. It is a little
like,
bit of a pie.
There's some flashes in there, like even like hard hit singles where he'll have on a mistake. Like he can do damage on mistakes for sure. That makes you remember what the ceiling is, what's possible in there. But then he strikes out looking a couple times, and you're kind of back to like if you're trying to figure out what exactly it's going to take to make the whole pie work, to make the pie taste delicious.
You said on Microbrew, I was listening and I wrote it down. I was at the gas pump in Lake Mills, and I'm like, I need to bring this up. And I don't have the exact quote, but this is like 90% what you said. You were talking about Frelick and Mitchell with JR, also of the Journal Sentinel, great friend of the show. And you said, and Mitchell and Frelick, neither has really grabbed the reins of that everyday outfield spot, despite playing every day. And I'm like, oh, that's really damn, like they have been playing every day. Like at some point, even for a week, even for 3 days, you'd want a stretch from either one of them. And Frelick puts the ball in play. I guess he'll occasionally hit it out of the infield, but he just doesn't provide any pop. He doesn't provide any power, and Mitchell's just striking out a ton. So I don't know. And then I like Perkins. Perkins has had lots of good moments for them, so I think he'll play more, but I just don't know what they're going to do with that outfield, I guess, to conclude.
Yeah, I mean, the good news at this point is like whatever happens from here until October 1st or whatever kind of doesn't matter. This thing's wrapped up in the division. I mean, certainly you would like to get that first round bye, so I shouldn't say it doesn't matter, but ultimately what matters is getting in the dance, and the Brewers they're going to be in the dance. And so it's not so much like I mean, like, what if they both turn it on for 30 games and then go 0 for 8 in a 2-game wildcard series? Like,
yeah,
you would not take that over them hitting 200 for the rest of the year and then showcasing what they're capable of in the playoffs. So that's sort of like the limbo that we're on with the Brewers right now that I don't think we're used to with this team at this point of the year, where it's like all eyes are toward the playoffs. And the funny thing about the baseball playoffs, obviously, is like it's difficult to talk about this far in advance because who knows what the heck happens. Aaron Savali complete game shutout could happen.
I Freddie Peralta, like Freddie Peralta could have one of those unbelievable starts. You know what I mean? And then all of the sudden,
or the exact opposite.
Yeah.
And then you're gone.
Yeah. And then you're right. Yeah. That's why
this is how it works. We know this.
It's a heartless thing. I ask you one more thing, and maybe I'm asking you to guess and to give your best estimate. And maybe that's not fair. I don't want to put you in a spot, but like the Brewers had situations with Counsell where they wrapped up their playoff spot a little early, not this early, but like 2 weeks. How do you think Murphy would handle that maybe different than like his attitude every day, knowing that a spot is locked up, seating still up for grabs? Like, how do you think Murphy approaches this next month?
I think even if they have this division locked up, well, they'll still be playing for something. It feels like they will be playing for a bye, likely. If they wrap this division up as early as they can, it means they're still playing well, which means they're probably in the picture with the Dodgers and Phillies. I think it's Murphy. I think it's Willy Adames. I think it's William Contreras. I think it's those three guys are to steal from Murphy. Those are the pillars of like how they will approach it. Willy Adames wants to play 162. Now maybe he'll get a day off in there somewhere if they wrap this thing up. But that's sort of the mentality that they're going to take. Pat Murphy talks about you can't coast uphill. So I'm sure they'll be smart about rest and all those sorts of things. But, like give Rhys Hoskins some days off, things like that. Contreras some days off his feet. I don't think they're gonna coast like they did in 21, for instance. Last year, I don't think they did quite as much. Like they wrapped it up last homestand and kind of played all their guys mostly through the end of the year. I think it'll be pretty full throttle forward, especially like if you get that bye. Do you want you want your guys to be playing up till as far as they can before they take 5 days off?
Well, in one hand might wash the other there. If you're playing really hard to get the bye, then your guys are probably going to need to play right up at, you know what I mean? And that's one thing that excites me about the final month or so of the season is that the Dodgers and the Phillies are not on some torrid 105 win pace. They're close enough right there to, at the very least, be a carrot to keep the Brewers engaged. Even if the Brewers don't end up getting a bye, they have something to lock in on and focus on and kind of chase over these last couple of weeks. Well, Kurt, we got to talk Aaron Ashby. We got to talk about some of my favorite things here. So thank you so much. I look forward to your reporting out of Nashville. Any country music or anything, any nods to that?
No, but I will. Not country music.
Okay.
There was a man in lederhosen playing a sousaphone at the ballpark, and it's quite honestly spectacular. One of the most beautiful things I've ever seen.
Do more Brewers fans need to get down to see a Sounds game? Is that a worthwhile? Is that something we should absolutely do? I've never been.
Yeah, it's a great minor league stadium. Yeah, great atmosphere for like hanging out with buddies, drinking, watching the game.
I don't like those things. No, it's not
good. Nice little skyline too. You get a little of the Nashville skyline in the back. So obviously you're in Nashville. If you're into those sorts of things, feel free. Broadway's not far from the stadium. It's a really good stadium. And I can tell you exactly how long the drive takes if you wake up at 4:30 and avoid Chicago traffic. About 8 hours and 10 minutes.
Oh, that's not bad at all for a Midwesterner. I can't imagine getting a plane ticket for that. That seems like a massive waste of money. Drinking and watching a ball game with my friends, that's not really something I'm interested in. But for those who are, that's if that's your thing. Kurt Hogg, we look forward to your reporting on your time in Nashville. Thank you so much. Appreciate you.
Yep.
There's Kurt Hogg of the Journal Sentinel, and Mike joining the show yesterday. Or I guess joining the show earlier this morning. My day's all turned around. I did Bill's show earlier today. Some really good interviews, and you can find Arif Hassan, who I had in the first hour. He just didn't make the cut for tonight's show. I knew I'd replay a little bit because my voice, it starts to get worn out. Final thoughts on Malik Willis, Anders Carlson, what the Brewers did this weekend, on everything. We'll wrap up the Wisco Sports Show next.
This is the Wisco Sports Show with Grant Bills on the Wisconsin Sports Zone Radio Network.
The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 3 minutes. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 2 minutes. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 1 minute. The Wisco Sports Show will resume in 30 seconds.
Final segment, Wisco Sports Show. The Packers have acquired Malik Willis for a 7th-round pick. Good conversations with Ryan Wood. Heard Hogan a lot of good calls, especially in the second hour. I'm a sucker. We got one more caller on the board. Get him in before the end of the show. Wisco Sports Show. Hello, who's that?
Eric,
I knew it, Eric. Bring us home. What's going on?
you know, I think this is a world record day for one Malik Willis because I hope he's listening because his name will never be mentioned on the radio this much as it was today.
Probably not.
So,
he got his run on Wisconsin Sports Radio this evening.
He really did. I mean, if we say it one more time, Malik Willis, you say it one more time.
Malik Willis. There we
Hey.
go. Malik Willis. Malik
Yep,
Willis.
there's
It's like
the
Beetlejuice.
record. There's the record. Anyway, I think this is one situation where we finally got the leg up on you, Grant. The Vikings got the leg up on the Green Bay Packers. We've got better backup quarterbacks. In fact, we're starting a backup quarterback, and our backup quarterback is probably better than Malik Williams. So I just wanted to get that. I mean, I'm looking for anything, Grant, anything at all.
Hey, you got to hang your hat
That's
when you have
all
a
I got
chance.
for
You know what I mean?
Right. Your backup quarterback is worse than ours, and we'll just leave it at that, and let's start playing the
Yeah.
season.
Oh
all
my
right?
God. Let's start it. Yeah, right now. I appreciate it, Eric. That's one thing that you can. Stop the presses, stop the count. Your backup quarterback is better than ours. That is correct. I appreciate that. A couple of texts, and I'm sorry I didn't get to these. Jay Krebs says Sanchez should be the every DH or bat 3, 4, or 5. I don't know. I just think there's a world in which if Gary's hitting well, they need a 3 hitter because I think everyone else makes so much sense. Turang, Churio, 1, 2, and then Contreras, Adames, 4, 5. They just need a 3 hitter. Bobby in Menominee says, fine with Willis over Clifford. Clifford is actually older, and Willis at least has NFL snaps. Yeah, I think it's an upgrade. I don't know that it's a massive upgrade. I think it's an upgrade. I wouldn't go so far as to say it's a half measure. It's just like at some point we need to draw the line between backup quarterback, developmental quarterback. Those are two things. Sometimes they're the same, but a lot of times, in the case of the last decade with the Packers, Hundley, Kaiser, they're separate. And it's great to have a developmental quarterback. If your actual quarterback goes down, rubber hits the road. Can I play? The answer in recent history has been no.